Welcome to our lecture tonight. I'm Steve Shields, President of Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. Today is Tuesday, August 9th, 2022. Apologies for last-minute changes in our schedule. We had some terrible flooding here in Seoul yesterday, and the forecast was that we would have even more rain today and maybe tomorrow. And in talking with a friend that I have that works for the subway system here in the city, he suggested that, having an in-person lecture might not be a wise decision owing to the possibility of disruption in the subway system as well as the surface streets. There was a lot of flooding on surface streets yesterday evening, at least here in the southern part of Seoul where I live. And so that's why we are all online. RAS Korea expresses sincere thanks to our generous patron, Asia Development Foundation, for their continued support. We also appreciate all our other many donors. Big or small, your support is welcome and needed. RAS Korea reminds you that lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. We are pleased and honored tonight to have with us Professor Seong Nae, who is Professor Emeritus of Religious Studies at Sogang University in Korea. She's a founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Korean Religions, which is the only English language academic journal dedicated to the study of Korean religious movements. It was launched in the autumn of 2010 by the Institute for the Study of Religion at Sogang University. Professor Kim spent a year as the visiting scholar at Harvard Yenching Institute and undertook research and writing for her book, which was tentatively titled Violence and Cultural Memory in Korea. Drawing on contemporary issues of state violence and memory in Asia, her research explores the way in which the legacies of the Jeju massacre, known as the April 3rd incident or the Sasam incident in Jeju-do, the Korean War, all of these memories are intergenerationally transmitted and reenacted in ritual practices of post-memory with commemoration, exhumation, reburial, and kinship resilience after that event. As always, after the lecture, we will have time for questions. So join me now in welcoming Professor Kim. Welcome, Professor Kim. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for a nice introduction. Hello, I'm Seong Nae Kim. Now I'm working on the book, Violence and Cultural Memory, but I'm focusing on Jeju Sasam incident, which is called Sasam. Tonight, I'm just talking about the transmission of cultural trauma and ritual mediations. I'm basically anthropologist in religion. I lived in Jeju Island from 1984 to 5 for PhD dissertation. Until I went to Jeju, I had no idea, no knowledge about the April 3rd incident. And I lived in Jeju for 2 years. But even that time, for 2 years, I didn't get any historical records or testimonies. So only after the democratization process in Korea in 1987, I could get a testimony, narratives, and also some basic historical factual truths. So I could write a dissertation. So I got a PhD dissertation in 1989, and with the title Chronicle of Violence and Ritual of Mourning, Jeju Shamanism in Korea. So I'm going to move to my research, and I will tell you why I focus on this April 3rd incident and its trauma and memory. I will basically read my slides, and I hope you follow my my reading of slides. This lecture inquires into question of state violence and cultural trauma and intergenerational transmission of loss with respect to Jeju Sasam incident, which is regarded as one of the first outbreaks of mass killing and social destruction in the early Cold War, lasting 7.5 years from March 1947 to September 1954. The Sasam resulted in a massive death toll of 30,000 and destruction of 1/3 of 300 village communities. Effects of horrendous events of the Sasam on collective consciousness and cultural identity could be termed as a cultural trauma, following the Jeffrey Alexander, sociologist. After the event, Jeju people expressed a sense of loss that all accumulations had disappeared and also generations discontinued, unquote. Thus, April 3rd functions as casserole or sexual event, which is cutting off points in chronology. I followed this particular term, the Stefan Furtuan, anthropologist at the London School of Economics. This casual event of the Sasam is generally referred to Shiguk or Muja Kichuk Shiguk, implying the particular times in the years of 1948 and 1949, which were traumatic then in the extreme for Jeju Islanders, and recalling the traumatic memory at present. My basic question is, how did this Sasam event come over the last 70, now it's becoming 74 years to be redefined as a traumatic event and become a generalized symbol of social suffering and cultural loss in modern Korea? Jeju is located in a very critical kind of place in between three nations. Jeju, particularly in modern history, Jeju is located in the periphery of Cold War, just like Okinawa and Jeju and Taiwan. These three islands were located in the periphery of Cold War, and this peripheral situation continues until now, because Korea is divided now. Anyway, but historically, Jeju Island has been considered a site of strategic importance, hence has a continued military presence over the years. At the end of the Pacific War, the Japanese set up Jeju as the front line in their defense against American landing. After the war, when the Japanese departed, 60,000 people repatriated to Jeju. Thus, there was a sudden increase in population that had many social, cultural, and economic problems under the American military occupation government. And this Life magazine photo is very famous to show that this historical truth of this Cold War situation in Korea. Actually, this photo was taken from the Yeosu Suncheon rebellion And this Yeosu Suncheon rebellion is directly related to Jeju Sasam, because the soldiers and militaries who at this area, Yeosu Suncheon, rejected to the dispatching order from Jeollado to Jeju Island to crush this communist uprising in Jeju. So we have to think about these correlations between these two rebellion incidents. What is Jeju Sasam 사건? The Jeju April 3rd incident is known as the Sasam 사건, which is named after the date of initial occurrence on April 3rd in 1948, when the island branch of the South Korean Workers' Party guerrillas began armed uprising against occupying American forces. In fact, this uprising event stemmed from the March 1st, 1947 civilian gathering, originally for the memorializing Korean March 1st independence movement. But it changed into civilian demonstrations opposing increased taxation, right shortage, and the oppression of a local autonomous people's committee by the American military government police, who eventually fired on the unarmed protesters, killing 6 and wounding 8. This people's committee was not a communist. Their leaders were actually local community leaders. In the aftermath, radical leftist force sought arms attacks against the police and right-wing youth stations on April 3rd, 1948. The Sasam incident then erupted into a civilian massacre as a planned act of state terrorism called the Red, after the establishment of the anti-communist state in South Korea on August 15th, 1948, and its wartime policy of preventive custody during the Korean War from 1950 to 54. So I call Jeju Sasam as a massacre. And during the April 3rd incident, over 30,000 inhabitants of Jeju Island were massacred in screening operations and house-to-house searches as part of the suppressive counter-insurgency campaign, with the support of American military aid to weed out so-called Reds, 빨갱이. The most victims of this counter-insurgency campaign were local civilians with no affiliation to any ideological position. After the division of Korea, the anti-communism of South Korean state effectively suppressed the memory of the civilian massacre and its aftermath for over half century, until the liberal administration of Kim Dae-jung established its first Truth Commission in 2000. In October 31st, 2003, the civilian massacre was officially recognized as a historical event of state violence by the government, when Roh Moo-hyun president apologized for death of innocents for the state and for the state oppression of the survivors, who had to endure the severe stigma of the state enemy or red insurgents, 폭도. You can see this map of Jeju Island by village, and each marked with the number of the April 3rd victims. Total 13,564 in 2003 in the official Sasam report. You can see in this map, there is no village which did not get this damage from this kind of total warlike massacre by the hand of Korean army and also police the denser the color, the higher the casualties. You can see a red dot. The village is the Bukchon village. It has the number of victims were 443, the biggest number among the victims. And this is 10 years after this, the first investigation of historical truth. We get 1,000 more numbers of victims. And now the numbers of victims do not really increase since then. And Jeju people are still reluctant to report about their experience. You must be interested in this 4 stages of transitional justice advocacy until the official apology of the state. First stage, from 1954 to 87, from oblivion to social attention. There was absolute silence, totally suppressed by dictatorial military regimes. In 1978, Nobel Antusuni, the Nobel of Hyung appeared, and the novelist was lynched almost to death, but he survived. He's still active now, but the Antusuni, you can see its opera will be showing in September 3 and 4, Saturday evening and Sunday. If you are interested in going to see this opera, you can contact me, because I'm the member of this Sasam kind of group, a study group. I can invite some people who are interested. And the Bukchon village massacre was the biggest event of mass killing. 443 victims in 2 days, 1949, January. The second stage, from 1987 to 92, initial local mass democratic movement. So testimonies were published, and these testimonies challenged the public opinion about this suppressed memory of Sasam. And in 1992, Darangshi cave was discovered, and there were, I think, 12 dead bodies were discovered in this cave, and this was the first event of visual evidence, material evidence of massacre. So third stage, from 93 to 98, struggle of periphery. So after Jeju Provincial Council created a provincial Sasam committee in 1993 under the Kim Young-sam government. And it focused 2 projects: official investigation of massacres and mass petition. That was the beginning of political, more aggressive political action. And the first report of their investigation was published in 1995. And fourth stage, from 1998 to 2000, enactment movement. The Sasam Special Act, establishment of the Sasam Committee in 2000, moved from this whole political act moved from periphery to the center of national politics. And they got a huge budget for all the commemorative works on Jeju Island. but there was no clear definition of what the Sasam is. And also there was no reparation for the victims. And that was the no reparation instead of governmental subsidy. There was a very small, tiny money. It was a compromise between the right-wing and left-wing politicians. And it was a strategic and provincial concession. So reparations later through activism after the official investigation of the truth was very anticipated. And so finally, this year, February 2022, the amendment of the Sasam Special Act for Reparation has accomplished. So almost how many years since 1978 to until now 50 years of transitional justice advocacy has been very successful case in whole Asia Pacific area. And I attended at this political act of victims, Sasam victims bereaved the families for amending the Sasam special law in front of the National Assembly. So my research has been focusing on the more on the intergenerational transmission and ritual practice of post-memory involving spirit possession and reburial of dead bodies after exhumation and family ancestor rites. And my key questions is how personal and family memory intertwine with the public official memory of the massacre. How moral practice of durational memory is mediated through ritual practices of placing and the replacing of the dead. And Walter Benjamin's this word really will guide line of my research. Memory is not an instrument for exploring the past, but it's theater. It is the medium of past experience as the ground is the medium in which dead cities lie interred. So what is Sasam memory? We know Sasam is trauma, but how memory is generated or regenerated from the trauma? There is a divergence between the national official memory and local individuated memory. This divergence is mediated in ritual practices of spirit possession, kinship rites, of burial after exhumation. The fragmented and interiorized nature of vernacular memory work reveals both the violence of national memory and the paradoxical demand that the perspective of victims be accorded a place within national memory for the sake of official recognition. So I adopt Marianne Hirsh's concept of post-memory in order to delve into this, the work of memory, memorial and commemorative practices. The post-memory is a type of inter or transgenerational memory that records the structure and function of memory, particularly in its affective force. The central medium of post-memory taken from ritual practices contain the particular mixture of mourning and recreation. Until recent public commemorative activities since the 1990s, shamans had a pivotal role in expressing things otherwise hidden for several decades. My research experience from 1984 to 85 my first encounter with the spirits of dead victims in shamanic ritual was the beginning of my research on April's incident. In the ritual of spirit possession and lamenting words of the dead, Yongge Ulin, the dead victims showed up and taught me about Jeju Sasam. I was amazed at this frequent showing up of the dead souls of the victims with this kind of lamenting words. So tragic kind of scene. So, but for first 18 months of my research, I couldn't get any information about the April 3rd incident. So I just returned back to the University of Michigan for my for writing a PhD dissertation. But listening to the tapes of ritual performance, this kind of lamenting words of the dead appear constantly. So I couldn't write dissertation without knowing this what the Sasam is. So I returned to Jeju Island in 1985. So I did stay for 5 months on Jeju, and I met a lot of people, but they were very much afraid of talking about the Jeju Sasam. So I couldn't get any real information. I couldn't meet any bereaved families of the victims. So I returned to back to the USA for writing. I couldn't write until 1987, when the first testimonies were published. So I got these testimonial books or publications from my friend in Jeju and Seoul. So I could finish writing dissertation in 1989. And anyway, it was a kind of secret until then. So the shamans had conduct the ritual secretly. So their secret ritual for the dead souls become a vehicle for shamanic public memorialization in the present. Sasam Haewon Samsengut. By engaging ritual mediations of massacre, I envisage the possibility of embodied memories, that is, memories carried in the haunting dead bodies that may be transmitted between the living bodies and across the between living bodies and dead bodies and across generations. And you can see this is the pictures taken in 2008 at the 60th anniversary of Sasam Sakon at the Jeju Peace Park, Sasam Peace Park. And you can see this tomb-shaped kind of memorial architecture structure, and it's inside. You will see this is a house of tablets of Sasam victims with paper oneself, and interestingly, it's organized by village units. So even after their deaths, these Sasam victims gather together, in other words, with other village neighbors. They are divided into separate plaques for each village. And this is Bukchon village's Sasam memorials for the 443 victims. It functions as a village collective ancestral shrine. You can see that these huge names are inscribed on this one big stone. if you visit Jeju, you should visit this Bukchon village Nobunsumi Memorial Park. And I attended at their individual family ancestor worship for the victims, and also this collective village ancestor rite, and also public, more official kind of public commemoration. There are three different commemorative rituals are performed. And these 443 victims were commemorated with a single mortuary tablet at altar. And it shows the shamanic commemoration ritual. It's a public ritual in 2019 for the victims whose dead bodies were drifted from Jeju to Tsushima Island, Japan. So Sasam memory is moving outside Jeju Island. And there is a huge diasporic community, Zainichi Jeju people. And I'm writing a new article about this, Trans-Pacific mobility of Sasam memory. And you can see here, the shamanic commemorative rituals are the main dominant form of commemoration in Jeju Island. And after excavation in 2009, shamanic public ritual, Haewon Sangsengut, for consolation of souls of the dead victims secretly buried in 1949 and 1950 under the runway at the Jeju Airport. You can see here a single tablet of the 100 victims who were missing for 60 years since the massacres. And shaman called the name of the dead souls one by one in the list of more than 200 victims, which took more than 1 hour. This part, calling the name of the dead souls, is the most important part. It's invocation of the dead souls. This is the most important part. So people listen to what the shaman says, or shaman called the name of the dead person. If any participant in this ceremony do not hear the name of their family dead victim, they would come up to this main altar and tell the shaman, you are missing this particular person who were killed here. And at that time, here you can see there were nine people, new dead, were discovered during this ritual. So this ritual is not artificial, it's a real ritual of reconvening of the dead people and living family. So it's the most significant part of the ritual. And then once all the dead souls are seated on this altar, and the shaman greets the underworld messenger and asking the messenger to take the dead soul of the victims safely to the otherworldly paradise. And you can see this is the most important picture, and it shows these are two flags. It's called I forgot. Anyway, it's the gate to the other 저승문. So the bereaved families bring straw shoes and clothes, new clothes, and also this rice porridge as an offering for the souls. who should live hurriedly for the other world, the paradise. So they don't eat rice, but porridge, because they had to eat very hurriedly. And this is really a kind of moving kind of interpretation. The, the dead people should leave this world as soon as possible. This is my interpretation. Anyway, 2 rows, and also once the underworld messenger is invited to this altar ritual ground, the shaman wear the clothing of the messenger, and she put this the special rose for the messenger, but outside of this 12 gates to the other world. So it's a shape as bamboo arches. And these more than 200 victims' bodies were excavated from this 1.5 meter below the runway. Can you believe that they were there over 60 years? I couldn't believe it. They were there. Anyway, there are 2 places, and there must be more, but there is no precise information about this burial massive grave. So it's a really they were very lucky to find out this the specific the massive grave, because they were lucky because the several people testified they helped to bury these people, the victims who were killed at the airport. So they knew this dimly where the location of this massacre. So it was very lucky kind of project. And remains excavated shows the factual proof how the people's hands were tied up in the back and wood stamped as an article left at the mass burial, which could be used to identify the name of the dead. And for 10 years, from 2009 to 18, excavation project could not continue due to budget cuts by conservative governments of Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye. But it resumed, and now 2018, 12 boxes of remains were carried to the public osari. I was very lucky to meet the bereaved families of the victim whose bodies were discovered this time. I'm still writing about this discovery. And the bereaved family's funeral rites. This picture showed the funeral rite, first funeral rite for the victims. There were more than 54 bodies were recovered, full scale skeleton of 54 bodies. So, but I asked the question when I saw this slide in the Sasam report, official report. I asked the question. The remains of the dead were displayed in the boxes containing bones that make a full skeleton of person. Do they belong to a single person, or are they reassembled from different parts of the bones of several persons in order to make a full-scale body composition of a single person? I think I asked a question to the person who was involved in this excavation project. She said it belonged to the single person, but this second question could be possible. You know, these body parts could be reassembled, but in the post-memory practices. Okay, that's the process of reconstitution that emerged out of exhumation of massive graves, and this process occurred in bodies and social relations and memories. So bodies are reassembled from disparate bonds, and social relations reconstituted from missing and absent to found and present. And memories also reconstituted from suppression and secrecy to release and openness. So memories are not that does not come out automatically from the experience. There are huge gaps between experience and the memorial work or work of memory. So the presence of bones in the process of exhumation has a kind of affective charge for the people that is produced out of these processes of reconstitution, drawing them into confronting the death itself and confronting the person who died and confronting the memory of how unjustly and mercilessly the person died. So I'm going to give you one example, case story. The exhumation of mass graves project at the Jeju International Airport. The Kim Bong-hong, the one of the person who was sentenced to death, and his death death penalty was he was executed. I don't know. Anyway, he was missing for over more than 60 years. So the Kim Sok-bo, his son, had an ancestor worship on the day of his birthday. So he waited and waited, and he finally, in the March of 2011, Kim Bong-hong, the father of Kim Sok-bo, could get a social status and personal name as Kim Bong-hong, and also a status as a 희생자, officially sanctioned victim status. So now this ashes jar with the name and the address, home address, is a kind of miracle. Kim Bong-hong, I'm going to give you this family story. Deceased Kim Bong-hong fled to the mountain in January 1949 when after the Bukchon massacre, he escaped massacre, and but he surrendered in spring and went down the mountain. But he was accused of getting involved in mountain guerrilla and sentenced to death in August at the court-martial and executed at the Jeju Airport and buried secretly together with other several hundreds. His 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter under the age of 10, were killed by the military in the Bukchon massacre and buried secretly by his surviving wife at the Nobun-suni, where now a Sasam Memorial Hall is built. Their buried place is called the Egi Mudam, became the material visible evidence of massacre. His surviving son, Kim Sok-bo, then 13-year-old, wrote a chronicle about his father's wrongful death, missing, and the exhumation of deceased father's remains in 2011. He was the public speaker of the Bukchon Village Association of the Bereaved Families of the Sasam victims. Also, he was a local epigraphist and a geomancer, acting like an organic intellectual. He didn't get any formal education, but he learned by himself. This man is Kim Sok-bo. Now he passed away in 2000, 19, but he was 76 in 2011 when I met him first. He was a senior president of the Bukchon Village bereaved families of the Sasam victims. And this tombstone, he wrote it. And he was a kind of village historian. He knows every family's history of Sasam. And the Kim Sok-po family and clan graveyard. It was a recent development in 2007. And in his family clan graveyard, I saw the gravestone of Kim's parents. Here, before 2011, when his father's bones were excavated, he still constructed this empty tombstone, and with this proper title of grave. So he was waiting and waiting in prayer for the return of his father's soul. So repatriation to home, Kim Sok-po's moral dilemma. He had a moral dilemma between the 2011 and 2016. Finally, when his father's ashes returned to his family cemetery, this is the father's dispersion. Dead bodies are dispersed in 3 places. First, the public osari together with other victims at the Jeju Peace Park, and the shrine of victims' tablets. Only a tablet with only name, gravestone without bodies at family cemetery. It's called the Honmyo, empty grave. If you visit Jeju, there are many empty graves. Shaped very small, tiny child grave, because there is no body parts inside. So it's a very small Honmyo. Anyway, Kim Bong-hong, the father of Kim Sok-po, was very lucky, whose bodies were excavated and finally joined his family. Excuse me. Kim Sok-po had a moral dilemma. This is the 3 siblings' permanent state of provisional burial, exhumed. For the purpose of remaining in history as a visible evidence of specific damage, such as the massacre, it was requested by Bukchon village Sasam victims bereaved families. Even until now, this small children's grave remain there. But Kim Sok-po complained about these villagers' demand for for his siblings' permanent stay. This official title of baby grave, as 희생자, it remained as a visible object of memorial monument of massacre, and it proves the ascendancy of the public value of death over the significance of personal familial meaning that calls for action and reparation. So I want to tell you that there's a shift in the model of social relations with the dead from non-place to the place. The first shift of the model of social relations appear in the transformation from ghosts to ancestors. By articulating born spirits and social relations, the process of reconstitution involves a shift in the model. Is a shift from ghosts to ancestors. It's not easy transformation. The ghost would be liberated finally when they receive a regular ancestor rite and also buried in a proper place. So they become, ghosts would become ancestors once they are given their place among other ancestors and whose bones are purified by the sun. And also receive the rights. Another shift of the model of social relations occur in a shift in the official recognition from missing and forgotten communist insurgent to illegitimately bordered state subject and citizen, 희생자, endowed with a new title as the heroic spirits, 영영, who were sacrificed for the state. It's irony, 영영, this new title is only given after the president's official apology. I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to move to this slide, how the dead is reassembled in the village community. You can see this another case of this reassemblage of dead within the community, within the kind of territory of the community. Effective bonds with the dead. Collective dead bonds are interlaced in the membership through deaths. It's called 유령 침묵회. There's a recent transition of this reassemblage of the dead. The civilian initiated exhumation and reburials is changed into state-led exhumation project. It could be interpreted as a nationalization of dead bodies. To reduce the place to an essence or form of places is to transform place into space. In doing so, to lose its particularity. So, village community shrine is changed into memorial park, more public place. And you can see this exact example of this transformation of just the graveyard for ancestors to the public memorial park. The three 현이합장명 could be translated as the collective graveyard of righteous ancestors, and now are changed into memorial park, equipped with a memorial exhibition hall. This look at these three mass graves, one ancestor tablet, and the three graves, mass graves. Why mass graves? There were more than 80 people who were killed during the Sasam, and they were buried in open spaces, and for several months, I think 6 months, the family members could not take their family dead bodies. So they mixed together, and when they moved the dead bodies to bury, they couldn't figure out whose body parts belong to whom. So they just mix them and make a huge graveyard. Grave. So I'm moving to the conclusion. This is a Nobunsunin Bukchon Memorial at the massacre site. It's relocating the dead in a state memorial park. And this is the Egi Mudom, baby's grave, the site of struggle for recognition of meaning of the methods. You can compare the before and after public memorialization. Left slide shows the children's graves without any special mark. But right-hand side slide shows this official plaque standing in front of their graves. And I attended at their ancestor worship. This double meaning of ancestral veneration for child victims. They are brought home again, receiving the proper ancestor worship. Child victims were given with the proper tablet and worshipped in ancestor rite, in spite of their non-ancestral kinship status. The middle-aged nephews bow to child victims as a kinship member, and they call them as uncles and aunts. That was kind of interesting transformation of ghosts to ancestors. And this is the final slide. The personal ancestor rite inside the public osari is still going on. There are many ashes jars unidentified. So once through a DNA test, their identity is clarified through a DNA test. They would be notified to the families. And this is the scene of a forced ancestor rite in front of ashes jar. And when I interviewed this family, their face looks so happy, so liberated from this long-term moral sense of guilt as a descendants. So conclusion, I want to talk about ethics in the work of post-memory. The question of ownership and belonging regarding the remains continues to be an issue today. While descendants of the deceased appreciate the official recognition of the violent death of their king, in the process of these deaths being made public, the question of ownership over the dead and their memory in the form of where these remains ought to be placed, whether in private family cemeteries, in public memorial parks, but also to whom knowledge of these deaths ought to be made accessible, continues to be contested. So this question is the new paradigm, open the new paradigm of memory work in the post-Cold War. After more than 60 years, the agency of the Jeju massacre death and their capacity to prompt action with regard to the treatment of their bones animates political action. Exhumed bones, a site of border crossing, flows between the living and the dead, and the vehicles of transforming ghosts into ancestral spirits, liberating relations with the unsettled previous dead. The last sentence, in the politics of post-memory, traumatic victims become culturally and politically respectable, and the trauma itself becomes an unassailable moral category. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm gonna stop here.
Professor Kim, thank you. We now have time for some Q&A. If you want to use the raise hand function, that's fine. If you want to type a question in the chat box, Leslie will help monitor that for us. So I wanted to start with a question, Professor Kim, about what was it that brought on the April 3rd uprising? What was it that people were arguing against?
What? I didn't get your question.
Okay.
Would you?
On April 3rd,
Mm.
in 1948, the Jeju uprising began, or
began.
Exploded at that on that day. What was it that people were fighting or arguing against?
The first slide I explained it, but there are sudden increasing populations, and there are very few job. But anyway, American military occupation for 3 years was perceived as a continuous colonization of Korea, and these leftist thinkers and activists and the members of South Korean Labor Party wanted to expected reunification of Korea, because around that time Korea was divided between the North and South, right?
Yeah.
And May 10th there was a election in the South, election for a single South Korean the establishment of a separate South Korean government. So Jeju people did not want it, so they boycotted the election. So they moved to 80 people did not appear in the election. Instead they moved to up to the Halla Mountain, and they waited. They hide there, and there was so the military government, American military government, was shocked at how the Jeju people had this collective protest against the authority. So that was I think the very I think this anti the South Korean Labor Party members were the rebel leaders, and they were educated in Japan, and they were quite trained as a socialist. But their numbers are rather just a few hundred. But within less than 1 year, they did not have enough weapons, and also so around June 1949, the most of guerrillas were I think they disappeared or killed during the confrontation, military confrontation with the occupational government. Anyway, so you know, there was the historians interpret the motive of this Sasam activists was the national the national unification and also anti foreign forces. So these two other. So interestingly, local Jeju people now believe that Sasam is not a communist insurgency, or it's not just a massacre, or it's not just something else, but it is the national unification movement. But it's a too idealistic kind of interpretation, because the numbers of the victims are so big and social damage was too much. And so is it enough?
That's helpful.
My explanation?
Thank you. That's helpful. Leslie, I see a couple of numbers on the chat box thing. Can you read questions for us, please?
Sure. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so we have two questions. The first comes from Allison Lee. She says, thank you, Dr. Kim, for the wonderful presentation. This is Allison Lee from Cambodia. This is my first time to hear about the 4-3 incidents, or Sasam, sorry. From what I heard from you, the collective healing process has been so much linked to Jeju's local rituals, traditions, and rites to transform social relations. But you also mentioned the government's Truth Commission. What is the role of it in this process? How did it help?
I explained this transitional justice advocacy over 50 or 60 years. And let me see. Government's Truth Commission, which was established in 2000, was a big jump in the whole this transitional justice advocacy movement, and it was a great success. And the Jeju, the purpose of this Truth Commission was to clarify the historical truth of this Sasam event, and also to recovery of people's honor. So people who were massacred during the Sasam was treated as a state enemy or insurgent, and or red bargaining. So they were treated. They got a social discrimination, and also social what is ostracization. So I think this government Truth Commission lifted all this criminalization of the bereaved families of the victims, as well as the victims themselves. Okay, that's the big jump, and the Truth Commission really helped to liberate this long-term durational kind of criminalization of the victims and also bereaved families. It has been a public secret. So when I did fieldwork research almost 40 years ago, I couldn't get any information about the Sasam, and nobody would dare to speak to about it. But I could get a glimpse of this event and this violence from listening to the shamans' laments, who are possessed by the souls of the dead victims. Anyway, even shamans could not give me information. Even they did not know exactly what happened, why their families and their neighbors were killed at the time. They did not really know. So that kind of historical truth of the Sasam massacre were clarified only after, yeah, 50 years, at least 50 years. It took a half century to get the historical truth of the Sasam. It's as the Jeju people are so endured this long-term suppression of memory and also trauma. And when I did fieldwork in the late 80s, the early 80s, I met a lot of people who suffer from psychological problem, what is called, psychosis. Many, but I didn't know the root of these psychological problems of Jeju people. That's what I heard from Jeju shaman. So when I did fieldwork in 80s, 84 and 85, there are many special ritual for the exorcism ritual to drive away the evil spirits. But these evil spirits who caused the trouble, misfortune to the family members were actually the victims of the family victims of the Sasam. So the shaman would interpret it. You should not. You should do some kind of more serious ancestor ritual for the sake of the honoring the dead dead families. Anyway, so there is no more this exorcism to drive away the spirits of the dead. That is very interesting kind of change. I wonder if my so this government truth commission really helped the mental disease. So now Jeju April, the Peace Foundation established the Sasam Trauma Center to provide some more better medical treatment for the psychological problem for the bereaved families. And it's very, very great help. Yeah, very successful. Now, Jeju is the first example of this great benefit of Government Truth Commission. And now Yeosu Suncheon rebellions, the victims organize this some kind of bereaved families organization, and they try to follow this kind of a positive track of beneficent help of the government truth commission. So Jeju Sasam case was kind of a very successful model of transitional justice and also a reparation, reparative justice too. I wonder if it's a good answer to the question. to the question. I don't know.
Allison, do you want to,
Elisa?
did it answer your question, Allison? Okay, she says, yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Right. Our second question in the chat is from Grant Hyun. He
Mhm.
asks, are there similar examples in the mainland of the Korean peninsula where shaman rituals are used to process trauma from mass killings of suspected communists enacted by the ROK military, and in some cases the US military? If so, where?
Okay, I know a shaman who did this kind of shamanic commemorative ritual for the victims of the massacre in 금정굴 in 경기도. 금정굴. I'm not sure you are familiar with this case of 금정굴 massacre. During the Korean War, there were many civilian massacre by the hand of militaries and police. And 금정굴, the bereaved families of the victims at the 금정굴 massacre organized themselves with their own money to ask to the shamans to commemorate their family death. So she did. I think it was in 1995 or something like that, even earlier than that. And I was very lucky to meet her. And she also helped to organize this public shamanic commemorative rituals in 1998 at the 50th anniversary of Sasam in Yeongang-ho in Seoul City. You must be familiar with that building, Yeongang-ho. It's located near Royal Asiatic Society building, I think. Yeongang-ho anyway, it's located in Jongno-oga. For 2 days, Jeju shaman. She's not a Jeju shaman, but she was 황해도 만신. But she had this Sasam 해원 상생국 public shamanic ritual together with the Jeju shaman 정공철 in 1998 at Yeongang-ho, and maybe that's what I know. And Gwangju, I don't know. Jeollado shaman also did some shamanic rituals for the victims of the Korean War, but that kind of shamanic rituals was organized more in a private level, not in the public level. Jeju Sasam, the case is rather unique. Yeah.
Professor, the first place you mentioned, could you type the place in the chat so it's easier for us to find or know what you're talking about? The first place you mentioned when you in this answer to the question.
Are there similar examples of mainland of Korean peninsula where shaman rituals used to process trauma? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes, the places that you mentioned. What could you repeat? Okay, thank you.
금정굴. There must be a report about this 금정굴.
금정굴. Can you type that in Hangul?
K-U-M.
Yeah.
J-U-N-G.
금정굴.
Cave. So
Okay.
people were killed, and their bodies were buried secretly in the cave.
Okay.
But it's not like a volcanic cave, like on Jeju. It's just mountain cave in I think Gyeonggi-do, Gyeonggi. I will give you more precise information later on if I find it.
Okay. All right. Is any other questions? Seeing none, I will thank you, Dr. Kim, Professor Kim, for being with us tonight. I can't say it was an enjoyable lecture. It was very moving. I've been to Jeju, to many of those memorial sites, and by the old airport where they found the burial, mass grave burial. I've been there. It's a powerful reminder of how we as humans sometimes can be pretty awful.
Right.
But it's also a powerful testimony to the people who have pushed for reconciliation. And when President Roh Moo-hyun moved forward with a lot of that, it was a really wonderful step in Korea's history. So we thank you all very much for joining us. I will give you a couple of announcements.